Welcome to Accounting Life with Jotham Tai, a space where we'll talk about anything and everything surrounding the people that grind through your month-end accounting close.
Hi, everyone. Today's episode is about career pathways in compliance. Our guest today is Susan Coleman, Global Vice President of Internal Audit and Controls at GoPro. On this episode, we'll talk about what makes compliance auditors unique, the attractive benefits of a career in compliance, and the skills you'll need to succeed in this career path. Now, I'll hand it over to our host, Gapify CEO, Jotham Tai.
Hey, Susan, how's it going? Thanks so much for joining us on today's episode.
Hey, Jotham, very nice to see you too. It's been quite a while.
It has been, but you are the perfect person to have this discussion about careers in compliance and, just to kind of tee things up for our conversation today. A lot of accountants consider different pathways and, maybe pivot from GL or AP to other parts of the business, whether it's corporate tax, FP&A, or in your case, internal audit. So we'd love to really dig in and, kind of pitch the pathway of compliance, because I'm biased. I think there are a lot of cool things about being in compliance that you get to learn that you wouldn't otherwise get to learn in other areas. So that's what the topic is about today, Susan.
Absolutely. I am excited to give this a little chat.
Me too. And I've got just a place to start, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions about what compliance, internal audit, and SOX is about. So I think if you ask any average accountant who is not in that type of role, I think the misconception is you're there to bust people down. You're just looking at payments for signatures or recons for signatures. But to me, it's a lot more than that. What are some of the other misconceptions that you hear about internal audit and SOX along those lines?
So just to set the stage, very interestingly, my career actually didn't start off in accounting. It started off as an internal auditor for the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. So I was, very junior auditor. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of bureaucracy and standard operating procedures at the Federal Reserve. So I certainly got my foundation in auditing and some of the things that you might consider, more stereotypical, like you just said, right? Like, did somebody do this task within these days, and was it signed and was it dated by the appropriate person? And was it filed in the right place and all that stuff, right? So while I do think that there is an absolute place for learning the foundations of how to audit and clear review notes from managers who would say, why did you say this? Or why did you come to such and such conclusion? As you progress through your career, you really start if you're a curious person, which I think, most successful auditors are, you start asking, well, why? Why does this happen? Why do they do this? Why do they do it this way and not that way? Why can't they do this before that? And so as that progresses, you kind of move in your career from this kind of assurance of letting people know, yes, these were the rules and they were followed, and more to an advisory type of role where you're giving your opinion about why things should or shouldn't be, or asking sort of leading questions about how has the business thought about doing things certain ways. And then eventually, as you get into more of a management and leadership role, you really earn the right to kind of anticipate things that may happen and really facilitate a conversation amongst senior leadership about, how they want the business to continue to grow or to protect some of the stuff that they are trying to protect as well, which I think is another misconception about internal audit. I think the IIA has done a really good job of trying to start pivoting in this direction of changing the brand of internal audit from, we're sort of protectors of the crown jewels to more of we're assisting to create additional value for the company as we go forward. So I think
you're spot on there.
Yeah.
So it's really, as you grow into a leadership role, it's more strategic, right, than the mechanical. But I love how you made that point, because I think the misconception is true potentially early in your career, right? So if you're a first or second year junior auditor, yeah, you are likely to start in kind of that, just checking the box and checklist and follow the audit program type responsibility. But as you grow into your career, I can't think of any other function, maybe minus FP&A, where you look kind of top down level, understand the business, understand the nature of the in audit's case, the risks associated with running a business. I think that's one of the allures for maybe folks in accounting that are thinking about pursuing a career in compliance. I think that's one of the draws, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, when you're in accounting, I believe you see the end result of the business operations for that period, right? So you're coming and you are displaying what happened in that business in certain ways that are required by our governing bodies. But in internal audit, you don't necessarily have those specific parameters. You're really able to be much more creative about the recommendations that you make. It's not really about whether the number itself is right or wrong, but much more about how you got to that number and what are the things that could affect that number from a strategic business perspective. If the business's objectives are for that number to be growing at a certain pace or to slow at a certain pace, then you're really able to see things in a much more holistic way and have those strategic types of conversations with management that I think that are more difficult for an accountant, a straight accountant, to have with
Absolutely.
business.
Well, and that's because when you're in the leadership role for internal audit, SOX, or compliance, you're not just reporting exceptions, you're partnering with management to figure out how to remediate. And there's definitely a certain level of strategy that's required to make sure you come up with the appropriate compensating measures to address those exceptions, right? So it's not just about exception reporting. There's like some business partnering, which I find very cool. Another, really, to me, in my own personal experience being in the compliance space, and Susan, I know you already know this, but for the audience here, I spent the first part of my years in public accounting and assurance, and then I started my own SOX practice after that. So my blood is still like a lot like compliance oriented, which I'm really proud of, because that's really what gave me the opportunities and also the know-how to run a business now on my own. But really, one of the appeals to me, I think, for an accountant who's looking to get visibility and to make an impact is how much exposure you get to like management levels as a compliance practitioner, right? So you sometimes present to the board depending on the level, and I did it at an early age. Actually, I was attending public company board meetings because I had to provide reports on significant deficiencies and also updates on, unfortunately, I've had to provide updates on material weaknesses too.
Yeah.
But is that something that you've seen throughout your career too? Just access to higher level management that you otherwise wouldn't get as a senior accountant?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, 100%. And I can't tell you, now at this stage of my career, I've had the privilege to be able to present to at least maybe 5 or 6 different boards of directors. And just as you, as a very young person, I either got to sit in on those meetings to listen, and then at first you start reporting very tactical things like you just mentioned, right? There's 100 controls, they're 20% done, and then there's this many exceptions. So it's very tactical, but if you're listening in those meetings, you really get to learn the flavor of the questions, the so what of all of that. that the board members really want to know. And as you progress, you're able to really stop talking about so much the percentages and the numbers, but so what does this mean? And what is your opinion actually as a professional about how that could potentially affect the company? And what are the things that the board should care about? And so I certainly don't know of any other profession which gives you that level of access to people all the way from the front lines, the people who are like entering orders into a system, all the way up to the chairman of the chairperson of the audit and risk committee of a publicly traded company or a private company.
That is so true, Susan.
Yeah.
You get access to every level of the organization, right? And I never thought about it. So you have not excuse is not the right word, but you have a reason for asking someone who's doing order entry of contracts, like how they go about doing their jobs, because you need to do walkthroughs and create narratives and so on. But then you also get to report to the audit committee like chair. And what job do you get the opportunity to touch both? I think that's pretty cool. I had never thought of it that way.
Yeah. And in every department, not only the order entry person, but the person who enters a new employee into the HR system, the person who takes care of logistics if you work for a company that's, moving product back and forth, a person who, who's in charge with doing contracts and onboarding vendors, just every facet of the company, you're really able to have contact with many people and become a great communicator and listener, so that you can eventually synthesize all that information, in a 15-minute chat at a board meeting. So I think it's quite an education and an opportunity.
I think it's worthwhile emphasizing again that it's literally every department, right? So it's not just departments that are financial focused. I think about HR, for example, and recruiting, right? So because they get covered in SOX as any level controls, I can speak to like what hiring processes look like and what kind of cans and notices are needed. Now that I'm running my own business, so it's not just necessarily like the numbers, it's operations, and I think that's what again makes this career path so appealing.
Yeah, and for example, in my current role, I'm responsible not only for SOX compliance, right, which is specifically financially reporting focused, but I'm also responsible for internal audit, in which cases we may look at some process that's totally out of scope, for SOX. So in my current company, for example, we are making a shift. Well, what is that? Where is that data coming from? Where is it stored? What does it tell us? How's it being analyzed? None of that stuff really would be in scope for SOX, but it's stuff that we have to learn, understand, and talk to so that we could advise the business on what insights they may or may not be missing from the data that they have for their systems.
Yeah, so it's financial, operational. We talked earlier how we get access to different departments and just being able to acquire knowledge in different areas. And something too that I've seen and wanted to confirm this with you is that these skills are transferable across different industries, right? It's not like in other parts of accounting. And I'll use RevRec as an example. When you're doing revenue, if you are doing SaaS or software revenue, that's not as easily transferable to DTC or some of these other like manufacturing industries. But I tend to think that compliance is different. It's easily transferable. Is that your sense as well?
Oh yeah, it's one of the things I really learned very early on in my career, and frankly by accident, because I was just a very curious person. And when I worked at the Fed, as I mentioned, it was a very, straightforward, black and white kind of work. But the Fed is a quasi-government agency. And I remember at the time thinking, well, that's not how real business works. Real companies want to make real money in the fastest time possible. So how do they do what? And I wanted to learn how that happened. And I went from eventually ended up in working many in different industries. And what you eventually learn is the most important thing is to familiarize yourself with what the objectives of that company are at that time. And everything just flows down from there. So whatever the company is trying to do to achieve those things, those are the things that internal audit is going to be focused on. And controls are controls, across a manufacturing company, across a company that has no product at all, across a bank, there's banking, which has a lot of regulation involved with it. But at the end of the day, a control is anything that management does or doesn't do in order to achieve some objective.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so spot on. And I think there's just so many opportunities too. And I want to touch on a word that you mentioned, and I definitely want to segue into the next topic, but you mentioned just having the curiosity, right? And being curious about how things work. And I think, again, these types of compliance and internal audit roles, you get to explore, right? And if you're a curious person, like, this gives you that opportunity to ask how something works in so many different ways that is not matched anywhere else in corporate finance. And so now that we've kind of pitched the appeal of being in a compliance profession, I wanted to ask you, Susan, so just to be very specific, if you've got like a senior accountant or accounting manager from your accounting team who's thinking about making a move to internal audit, SOX for compliance, like, what would they pitch to you to give you the confidence that they can do to take up a career in compliance?
First of all, curiosity to me has got to be number one. Just a relentless, like, why and how kind of questioning, right? Very opposite from, this is how we always, did it. This is how I was taught to do it. This is the template that was given to me. Just curiosity and a penchant for relationships and really building camaraderie. Internal audit is, even the name of it bothers me at times. I wish we could change our name to like internal consulting, because I think, at least when I go into a new business unit that I haven't worked with before, that's what I say. Think of us as your internal consultants. Talk to me about things that are causing you pain points. Talk to me about how you're trying to work with another department, but you're having trouble. You have some part of the data, they have another part of the data. And if you could put it together, what kinds of problems or information could you get? So it's a willingness to really position yourself as a consultant to the business to help achieve their goals and objectives, which I think if you're an accountant, but you have that sort of drive in you, you could be a great internal auditor, whether it be in SOX, in a SOX role, or in an operational role.
Yeah, I agree with that. And quite frankly, and just with any profession, there's a diversity of personality types and preferences and the jobs that people undertake. And if you don't have that consultative kind of vibe or personality, it's going to be tough for you to move up the leadership ranks in a compliance role. And I know in accounting, there are some professionals, and this is totally fine too, that are fine with just knocking off journal entries from their month-end close checklist. And so it may not be as consulting oriented as others, but it's a great heads up, Susan. I think that is an important skill. Now, of course, there are probably some like testing roles too in audit, where you kind of just like knock off things on an audit program. But for a leadership role, I completely agree with you.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important, that's why I'm very fortunate to have had the career path that I have, because the Fed really did give me that foundation. It does start with mechanics and the things that you learn and how things are, built up, and they're cumulative, right? So if you don't have that foundation, it's difficult to build credibility with someone. As the internal auditor, you'll never have the knowledge of the business leader that you're talking to about their business, but you can build credibility because you know the foundation of things. I think the other thing that's important is language. I think that as auditors, we tend to use certain of our own sort of buzzwords,
Yes.
the risk event and the, things like that, which I really push my team to sort of get away from that type of language, because business people don't think like that, right? They don't think about what is the risk event and what can go wrong. How about just say it, in plain English? That coupled with the other part, which is when people are trying to run a business, they're thinking not only about risks, but their opportunities. That's why they're the business leader. They're weighing risks and opportunities. We are the risk, drum beaters. We're here to remind you of what the risks are. Or could potentially be, but we do have to step back and say that's only one input, for a business leader to make their decision, right? So it doesn't have to be our way, and risk doesn't have to be eliminated. Risk can, risk can be transferred, risk can be accepted, risk can,
risk can be an opportunity even.
Yes, exactly. So I think language and the way you approach how you communicate with people really just builds this circle of you build credibility, then you get asked more questions, then you ask more questions, and that really hopefully eventually leads to this very consultative type relationship between audit and the business.
As you wrap up here, Susan, I'm surprised I used the word consultative several times and didn't mispronounce it, or at least I don't think I have yet. But that's a tough word for me to pronounce for some reason. It doesn't kind of roll off naturally. But Susan, thank you so much for joining us today. I'd love to actually dig in further for future episodes. I think there's a lot more to unpack with a career in internal audit and compliance, but definitely a great start for our audience because, again, part of the reason why we do this podcast, we recognize that there are so many different directions where accountants can take their careers. I think this is a very, very interesting one, and for the reasons that we talked about today. So thanks again for joining us today, Susan.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Thank you for stopping by. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you want more information, please check us out at gapify.com, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.